Hello, I'm Esther Gidhu-Ewart. Welcome to Africa 54. Here's what's coming up. Fuel prices and a weaker local currency pushes Nigeria's consumer inflation rate to its highest level since 1996. Former U.S. President Donald Trump wins the 2024 Iowa Caucus, finishing with more than 50% of the overall vote. We'll have a report. And in our health report, Cape Verde is declared malaria-free, a significant milestone for the country. We'll have more from Dr. Dorothy Achu on what that means. All this and much more coming up on today's Africa 54. We begin in Nigeria, where food prices are spiking and the consumer inflation rate in Africa's largest economy hit its highest level since 1996. David Doyle has the details.
Nigeria's inflation rate rose to its highest in more than 27 years in December, the latest statistics showed on Monday, as food prices surged. The 12th straight monthly increase in consumer inflation is exacerbating a cost of living crisis in Africa's largest economy. It's also piling pressure on Nigeria's central bank to raise interest rates. Its governor, Olayemi Cardoso, is yet to hold a rate-setting meeting since taking office in September. According to the National Bureau of Statistics, consumer inflation was up from 28.2% in November to 28.92% in December. That's the highest level since mid-1996. The food inflation rate, which accounts for the bulk of Nigeria's inflation basket, went from 32.84% the month before to 33.93% in December. The Statistics Office said prices rose for a broad range of food items, including bread and cereal, oil, fish, meat, fruit, and eggs. Analysts say higher fuel prices and a weaker naira currency have also stoked price pressures. Last May, President Bola Tinubu embarked on Nigeria's boldest economic reforms in decades. He scrapped a costly but popular fuel subsidy and devalued the currency to try to revive economic growth. However, growth is yet to pick up and inflation has worsened.
That was David Doyle of Reuters reporting. Several Tunisian opposition political parties and human rights organizations staged a demonstration in Tunis over the weekend to commemorate the 13th anniversary of the Jasmine Revolution, which toppled the former dictatorial regime in January of 2011. VOA's Paul Ndiho spoke to William Lawrence, professor of political science and international affairs at American University School of International Service, for an update on the political situation.
I guess we start with the most important thing that happened in the region in the last 20 years, which was the Arab Spring, which began with 18 unprecedented protests in 18 Arab countries. Tunisia came out the most successfully from those 18 sets of protests 13 years ago, and did manage for 10 years to have a pretty successful democratic transition, the most successful attempted democratic transition in an Arab country ever. After 2021, President Kais Saied gradually grabbed all the powers. He, put in an emergency set of measures, shut down the parliament, created a government and a prime minister fully under his control rather than under the control of the constitution, replaced the constitution, held elections, created a sycophantic parliament that is basically a yes man for his decrees. He rules by decree, and he enfeebled the judiciary, arrested most of the political opposition, and the backlash was somewhat muted. It's often attributed in the press to apathy. I don't think that's the right analysis. The right analysis is that he arrested most of the political opposition, shut down the media to a large degree, and basically let the Interior Ministry, the police, take over, intimidating the population to the point that they couldn't function democratically.
How would you characterize what happened? This was a guy, when he was in opposition, everybody looked up to him as somebody who could take that country forward. A lot of people have suggested that he's even worse than the former dictator who was there, Ben Ali.
Every single official I know from the former regime before 2011 says he's worse. All of them. As does the entire political opposition, continues to be relatively popular. Polls put his popularity in the sort of 50% range. And that's, according to a lot of my Tunisian contacts, a little bit like the Trump phenomenon. He's a populist that blames everybody else but himself for the failures. He's convinced the population that the deep state and foreign conspiracies are creating all the problems.
What can Kais Saied do to alleviate the fears? It seems these protests are driven by some of the drastic changes that he has put in place. How can the opposition force him to revert some of those things that he has put in place?
A national dialogue would simply come up with agreements on new elections, democratic elections, where everyone is included. You don't need a new constitution to hold elections. As we see in countries in transition, you just need new elections. A constitutional assembly could come to power. You could probably do a kind of merger of the old constitution and the new constitution, things people like from both, and off to the races. I mean, it would be relatively easy to do. And most Tunisians would probably support it to get out of the current impasse, which, among other things, limits investment in economic development. But we don't have the political will for that.
That was William Lawrence, Professor of Political Science and International Affairs at American University's School of International Service. The 19th Non-Aligned Movement Summit entered Day 2 Tuesday in Kampala, Uganda. The 5-day summit is the largest grouping of states worldwide after the UN, with 120 member states, 18 observer nations, and 10 organizations. VOA spoke to some of the delegates in Kampala.
Many issues will be discussed, among which we are told the question of Palestine might be one of the vivid areas of discussion. I believe other areas will emerge from the meetings. I cannot divulge now because I'm not the spokesperson for the summit nor for the ministry, but a position on Palestine might be reached by the member states, among others.
We all know this is a very historic moment for the region, for Uganda, for Africa. You know, the NAM Summit tries to achieve a lot of very important goals and has a lot of important priorities. One, we're looking at the global scene, you know, all the major developments, and we are trying to see that how our region can play a much more bigger role in terms of influencing, but also working together in collaboration.
Why we are here? Because a lot of investors, a lot of good opportunities in Africa, we know. That's why we would like to start some business cooperation with Uganda, Kenya, and other East African countries. It's a really good organization for us because from the different part of the East Africa, many people, many investors, many manufacturers, many businessmen are here. It's a good chance for us to meet with them. And we are talking about the opportunities in Africa, also what we can supply from Turkey, what we can import and what we can export to them.
Delegates at the 19th Non-Aligned Movement Summit in Kampala, Uganda, speaking to VOA. The battle for soccer supremacy in Africa is heating up as teams display their prowess and skills at the Africa Cup of Nations ongoing in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. Among those watching the game is a U.S. delegation. VOA's Mukbil Yabaru spoke with the United States ambassador to the Ivory Coast, Jessica Davis-Barr.
The opening ceremony was amazing. It was inspirational, it was exciting. You could see the cultures reflected from across the continent. The infrastructure investments, the investments in bolstering security, the investments in ensuring that they had medical care standing by, the investments to ensure that all people could participate either in person or virtually. So this was a real culmination of efforts from across the continent and truly across the world. And we could see it as a global event and putting Côte d'Ivoire on the global stage where it belongs. And so we recognized, all of us, that not only did it meet, but it absolutely surpassed our expectations, and we were thrilled to see the success of it. It was really an opportunity for us to express the way in which the United States is partnering with Côte d'Ivoire to be able to show up in all ways, including through sports, and to be able to show up with 3 Olympic gold medal winners, 3 women who are at the top of their game and who have really transformed the world of sports. And so that's really for us a way to be able to, during this match, highlight the ways in which the United States and members of the African diaspora have transformed not just the sports world, but the world across different cultural industries. The fact that they were representing the President's Council on African Diaspora Engagement was hugely significant for us, so that we could show the full diversity of America, which corresponds to the full diversity of Côte d'Ivoire and this continent. And so in this delegation, in this match, and in this historic moment, we were able to show up with the best that America is.
The United States Ambassador to the Ivory Coast, Jessica Davis-Barr, speaking to VOA's Mukbil Yabaru in Abidjan. Former U.S. President Donald Trump is the resounding winner of the 2024 Iowa Caucus, finishing with more than 50% of the overall vote. As VOA's Ken Faribault reports from Des Moines, dangerously cold weather that descended on Iowa ahead of the caucus impacted turnout, with overall participation down this year after reaching record highs in 2016.
Extreme freezing temperatures didn't deter Sarka Moore from attending one of former President Donald Trump's final 2024 Iowa Caucus campaign events. It also didn't dampen her plans to show up in person to support him on caucus night.
I'm excited, very excited. It's my first time.
Moore, an immigrant from the Czech Republic, spent time researching the caucus process as a first-time participant, motivated to support Trump.
I love his policy. Everything was great under Trump's administrations. No wars. Economy was great. And there wasn't like open border.
We want to thank the great people of Iowa. Thank you. We love you all.
Trump's campaign resonated with Iowans, who braved the cold and ice across the state to deliver him a win with one of the largest margins of any Republican candidate in the contest's history.
You know, I would say this is a pretty good turnout.
Jan Good cast her vote at a caucus site inside a high school gymnasium in the Des Moines suburb of Ankeny.
And I think the people that were absolutely determined were going to be here. I do know of some folks that were older and they chose not to get out. It was slippery coming in.
Good's vote went for Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, who won the overall count at her specific caucus site.
DeSantis, 63.
We're caucusing for what we believe in, and I think that DeSantis is what I believe in, and I still appreciate Trump. I appreciate what he did. I appreciate how he got it done. I appreciate who he was at the time. Unfortunately, rightly or wrongly, chaos follows him.
DeSantis edged former UN Ambassador Nikki Haley to take second place in Iowa. Businessman Vivek Ramaswamy, who finished fourth, bowed out of the race and endorsed Trump. Among those who finished at the bottom of the results is former Arkansas Governor Asa Hutchinson, who didn't hold back his criticism of Trump on the campaign trail.
People don't like hard truth. And if they have an opinion on something and someone speaks against that opinion, they don't think as much of you. And so your negatives go up a little bit, but I also have confidence that I've spoken in the right way. I've spoken as a gentleman. I've spoken what I believe. And that, in the end, is what is important.
Both Democrats and Republicans typically participate in the Iowa caucuses, but this year Democrats turned to mail-in ballots for their presidential preference, with with incumbent President Joe Biden expected to win that final tally. Democrats are focusing on the South Carolina primary in February as their first major election event, amid criticism that Iowa and New Hampshire aren't diverse or big enough to play a prominent role early in the nomination process, something Iowa's former Republican governor, Terry Branstad, disagrees with.
The system that we have, the Iowa caucuses followed by the New Hampshire primary, means that real people in the caucus state of Iowa, in the primary state of New Hampshire, have an important say in choosing who the leader of this country is going to be.
The campaign for the Republican nomination now shifts to New Hampshire, a state which looks to have better weather and perhaps turnout than Iowa, as it hosts the first in the nation primary election January 23rd. Kane Fairbaugh, VOA News, Des Moines, Iowa.
For more on the Iowa Caucus, I'm joined live via Skype from here in Washington by Edmund Garib, a senior advisor at the Washington Institute for Peace and Development. Professor Garib, welcome to Africa 54.
Thank you.
Now, despite mounting legal challenges, Donald Trump has an overwhelming lead in the Iowa Caucus. What does this mean for the upcoming presidential election?
Well, it clearly means that Trump owns the Republican Party. It has shown that he has the support of the majority of the Republicans, and even he has gained among some independents as well, although that number was far less than some of the other candidates. For example, Nikki Haley appears to be doing better among the independents than President Trump or former President Trump in a number of states. Nevertheless, except for the fact that there was a dip in the support for Trump after the first indictments against him, but it seemed that after that things began to change and to his favor, and he has gained more and more support. I mean, this victory in Iowa is amazing when you have he topped the numbers for all other opponents. He got close to 52%, and he was ahead over 32 points over Haley and about 30 points over DeSantis. And that is a very important indication. That, however, does not mean that Trump does not face problems. A lot is going to depend, I think, about the result of some of the charges against him. Yeah. Also, a great deal will depend on what happens as well in some of the areas, both on the domestic level as well as on the international level, that are likely to influence and affect the presidential.
You mentioned the legal challenges, but I'm wondering, so if convicted of any of the crimes that he is accused of, how would that affect his bid for the White House and his base supporters?
Actually, that's a very, very important point, because on the one hand, I would say about a quarter to a third, according to different polls, among Republicans, they believe that they would not support him if he was convicted. Nevertheless, at the same time that we hear this, we also hear that, first of all, it's going to take quite a bit of time before we know if there are going to be any judgments made before the election period. That means that a number of these cases may not be even brought to final trial and judgment before the elections. And if that's the case, that's probably likely to help Trump. If there are indictments and judgments against him, then I think it might hurt him a bit. Nevertheless, that also President Biden and his son Hunter are facing some legal problems, and that also depends on how that goes as well. So I think the situation is still very fluid to a certain extent when it comes to these issues. But one important point is that Trump appears to have, worn these indictments as badges of honor in a way, and they have helped him instead of weakening him. The more indictments came, the more money he was getting in terms of contributions, and the more public support, and the more he began to appear as if he's a victim instead of the person who committed a number of, some people believe, crimes. And so this is really very unusual situation.
Right, Professor, we will have to revisit this. It's way early, but we'll get back to you. Professor Edmund Garib is a senior advisor at the Washington Institute for Peace and Development. Still to come, Benin receives its first doses of a vaccine, malaria. We'll be right back.
This week on Straight Talk Africa. Houthi militants attack commercial vessels in Red Sea, threatening vital shipping routes. The U.S. and Britain retaliate with airstrikes on Houthi military targets. How will this affect the global economy? Join me, Vincent Makori, for an in-depth discussion on the next Straight Talk Africa.
Health, wellness, sport, beauty, medical breakthroughs. Healthy Living cares about your well-being. What are the main health concerns in Africa and around the world? Find out the latest on coronavirus. Connect with our experts and ask them questions.
How long does the virus stay?
Join me, Linor Moudou, in Washington, every week on Healthy Living, right here on VOA.
In other news, Britain's plan to send migrants to Rwanda returns to the spotlight on Tuesday as lawmakers debate the controversial issue. British Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has staked his political future on slashing record levels of regular and irregular migration. A Turkish court has convicted Mohammed Hassan Sheikh Mohamud, the son of Somalia's president, over the death of a motorcycle courier and sentenced him to 2.5 years in prison. He then commuted the sentence to a fine. Mohamud was charged with causing death by negligence after a diplomatic car he was driving hit the motorcyclist on a highway in Istanbul in November. Burkina Faso's former chief of staff of the military police, Lieutenant Colonel Evrard Somda, who was fired in October, has been abducted from his home by unidentified armed individuals, according to sources close to him. Somda was kidnapped Sunday from his home in Ouagadougou. It's time for Health segment, and joining us now is Africa 54 health correspondent Linor Moudou with the latest news on malaria. Hello, Linor.
Hello, Esther. Hello, everyone. Officials in Benin say the country has received its first doses of a vaccine for malaria, the leading cause of infant mortality in the nation, and will begin administering them soon. They say nearly 216,000 doses of the RTSS vaccine were delivered to immunize around 200,000 children under the age of 2. Government data reveals that in Benin, 40% of outpatient consultations and 25% of hospital admissions are linked to malaria. The World Health Organization has certified Cape Verde as malaria-free. The WHO says Cape Verde has gone 3 consecutive years without local malaria transmission and has demonstrated the ability to prevent the re-establishment of transmission to be certified malaria-free. For more insight, I spoke with Dr. Dorothy Achu. She is team lead for tropical and vector-borne diseases in the WHO Regional Office for Africa. How does the WHO collaborate with Cabo Verde to ensure that they can sustain this achievement of being malaria-free?
Yes, the first thing is that once you're certified as a country, it doesn't mean that you stop your activities. So we have worked with Cabo Verde to develop another plan, a strategy, which is to prevent the re-establishment of malaria. And in that plan, it takes really strengthening the health system, the laboratory systems to properly diagnose, train the doctors, nurses, train surveillance officers, train vector control teams to be able to monitor cases that could be suspected for malaria, but on the vector space also identify that there are no infected mosquitoes in the country. So that plan also has a set of activities that ensures that there is no re-establishment, but more so, we expect the country to keep reporting every year that they have 0 cases. And each year we'll expect the country to report the number of cases they have registered. Of course, we expect them to have imported cases from different countries, and Cabo Verde has been exposed to those importation of cases coming from neighboring countries. But once the cases come, they are labeled as imported cases and investigated to make sure they're imported. And in case there's a local case, an indigenous case which arises from the country, that is where we have to put together all the strategies to make sure that those cases are treated very early so that they do not establish new communications through the vectors. So reporting and monitoring is very key.
Is the Cabo Verde experience hope in terms of the reach of a malaria-free Africa? Is it something that is possible, or is it very difficult to really anticipate that?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. We have been looking at the statistics in the region, and they are quite disturbing. They are disturbing because in terms of cases, the cases have been increasing rather than decreasing. Nonetheless, we have a few countries which are like Cabo Verde, targeted for elimination. We have about 6 of the countries in Africa. They're among the 25 countries globally that have been identified as being able to eliminate malaria by 2025. That is the end of next year. So we have countries like with low transmission. We can cite Botswana, Eswatini, South Africa, those countries. And there's even an island countries such as Sao Tome, Principe, Comoros. Those are countries with low cases, with low number of deaths, and they are on a very good path to also eliminate malaria, and they can learn from Cabo Verde what they did. But for the rest of the country, the rest of the continent, it's going to be a difficult task, but it needs that we just keep going on the path of mobilizing enough resources to make sure that interventions are available, services are being delivered to the people, to the populations, so that the burden is reduced.
That was Dr. Dorothy Achu, team lead for tropical and vector-borne diseases in the WHO Regional Office for Africa. Esther, back to you.
Thanks, Lino. Be sure to watch Lino Mudu's health reports every Tuesday right here on Africa 54. And that's our show for today. Be sure to watch Africa 54 on our website at voaafrica.com. From all of us here in Washington, thank you for watching.